Hello everyone, my name is Jordan, and I wanted to do a meet the contributors of the Basement Lab podcast so that you guys could put a um, face and um, background to the voice that you're hearing. So I'm Jordan. I'm the person who thought up of the Basement Lab podcast. I did so because I'm a PhD student, and when you are a PhD student, you don't have a lot of time for free reading. You're reading scientific literature all the time, mostly primary, a lot of secondary articles. You really don't have time for free reading. And I listen to podcasts and Audible books as a way of um, filling in that gap. It's something I can do while I'm driving to campus or to work or walking the dogs. So it was a way of being connected with pop culture and scientific findings and really just keeping that learning bug going. So I thought of this when I was discussing numerous issues with other scientists in my lab. So anyway, I wanted to give you a face to go with the name. So about me, I'm a PhD student at the University of Missouri currently. It's where our lab is located. I am in an urban ecology lab. So everyone in our lab studies urban ecology, um, almost all of it dealing with communities, so plant and animal communities. I study specifically urban bat communities, and within that, the interactions between human populations and bat populations. So for that, I actually end up not only learning a lot of biology and ecology, but I study a lot of sociology and even a little bit of psychology. So I do have a pretty far-ranging background of training and expertise, which is nice. How I got here, let's see, I was from a small farming community outside of Kansas City, Missouri. Hence the Royals shirt. It's opening day baseball season, so I thought I'd show my support. We actually came back from watching the game just a few minutes ago. And anyway, I was really active into sports and extracurricular activities and was reading all the time and uh, went to the University of Missouri uh, for my undergrad. And I have a bachelor's of science in fisheries and wildlife sciences, which, if you're wanting some context, is really similar to a zoology or a wildlife biology degree. Uh, it is it it was a very science intensive set of training. I have minors in animal science and in biology, as well as I was one class away from a minor in history and a minor in religious studies. But I got a 5 year degree in 4 years, and I didn't want to wait around an extra semester just to get minors. So I passed on that. While I was an undergrad, I was an athlete here at Mizzou for 3 years. I started my sophomore year. I was actually uh, I actually tried out for things my freshman year, didn't make it. Tried out again sophomore year and made it, and then was sophomore, junior, and senior year an athlete. I have all the injuries to prove it. I did a study abroad in Costa Rica at Earth University and the Monte Verde Research Station, so very different parts of Costa Rica. That was really fun. My emphasis of study were on zoonotic diseases, which are diseases that cross species barrier. So when we talk about things like rabies, that can go between all mammals, things like um, avian influenza, which can cross between birds and people. So zoonotic diseases, things that cross species barrier, and on invasive species. Did a lot of research on invasive species, and honestly, there's a lot of tie together between zoonotic diseases and invasive species themselves. So that was kind of fun. I then got my master's in education in science education. I emphasized informal education styles. So it was actually something that wasn't a thing until another student and I got it to be counted as a form of education So informal education styles, that's the teaching that you would get at like a museum or at an agency, people traveling with nonprofits or to your school to give, you know, talks. So that's all informal style. And that means that we had to have training on education from preschool through adult. You know, a lot of teachers get training in elementary or in post-secondary, or secondary or adult or pre-K, and we had to get training all across the board. So that was interesting, a lot of fun. I also did a study abroad in my master's in Ireland, which was a blast, and used that degree and experience to become a science teacher in Korea. I lived in Korea for a little while, a little over a year, as a science teacher. Ended up being the head science teacher at my school, which was kind of fun. I just started off as a regular teacher, and within the year became the lead science teacher. And that was a lot of fun. When I moved back to the States, I moved to the East Coast and worked with a private company doing scientific monitoring. So I actually worked with bats, then monitoring bat populations and looking and tracking for endangered species. So that was a lot of fun. Um, Came back to the Midwest when I took a job with AmeriCorps. Through AmeriCorps, I was a teacher. When AmeriCorps lost its funding a few years back for a few months, they stopped paying people. It was at that time that I decided to apply for my PhD, and now here I am in my PhD program. I got started down this whole track, interesting enough, through zombies. That's actually what made me want to be a biologist. Specifically, the Night of the Living Dead, the old original '68 black and white movie. I loved horror movies as a kid, and they would show that one all the time because it lost its copyright. So it's in public domain, so you could watch it late night all the time, and I did. So that was really fascinating to me. And then the game Resident Evil 2. Back when I first bought a PlayStation, we were poor growing up, so I didn't really had to save up forever working a summer job to be able to buy the PlayStation. We ended up not having a TV that could run it, so saved up, talked with my brother, saved up a little more, got a TV that could run it. I had to play it at my brother's apartment for like a year before we could play it at mine, which was interesting. So yeah, Resident Evil, and I don't know why those movies and zombies wanted to make me be a biologist, but it just did. I just thought some of the idea behind that research was fascinating, I guess, and was hooked. So wanted to become a biologist. Before that, I'd wanted to be a veterinarian, so I didn't really change my mind too much. But yeah, I really love zombies. Really love post-apocalyptic literature, stories, art, movies, video games. Really love post-apocalyptic of all sorts. Really love atomic research. The ideas behind it because of the post-apocalyptic literature. For decades, that was based on atomic and nuclear energies and disasters, and more recently, it's been on pandemic disasters. So they both fit in my wheelhouse. I really love them. I do really have a broad interest group. I am kind of all over the board, which is interesting. One of the reasons why I wanted to do this podcast is scientists are people. We have interests outside of just what we study, and sometimes we approach that like it's our job, like we're scientists, and so we think way too deep about it. But it's fun. It leads to some interesting discussions. Um, when it comes to like comics, we talk a lot about comics. Another thing, I'm way too poor growing up to even afford a comic book, so I ended up reading my friends' comic books, playing with their action figures. Not really knowing too much because I couldn't read them in order, anything like that. I had no idea where the stories fit in. I would just know that I liked them. When I was a master's student, I actually had a little bit of money and I bought some of my first comic books, which were The Walking Dead. So those were the only comic books I really read because I couldn't afford too many, so I would just buy those. Over time, I've actually amassed quite a collection. I've branched out. Batman, obviously, I love Batman being a bat researcher. I think they kind of go hand in hand, so I've read a lot of Batman. I actually really love Marvel. The Marvel superhero comics are I have a lot of them. You'll hear us talking about those. My favorite is actually probably Image Comics, though. They tend to not do superhero comics; they just do story comics, and I really love them. I've got a lot of stories out of like IDW and Oni and things like that that are just story-based comics that I really, really love. But Image is probably my favorite, followed by Marvel and IDW. Really love those comics. Really love comics in general. Again, I don't have any time to read, and a comic, is actually a very condensed story because you are able to put what might be an entire page of action, you can draw in 2 panels. By the time you write out the descriptions for that. So you can actually get quite a bit of story in a comic, which is why it's one of the few things I have time to read. But yeah, anyway, I thought you would like to get to know some of us, kind of know where we come from. I have a lot more interest and a lot deeper background than I can share in 10 minutes with you. But all of us are going to try to do one of these, including we're going to contact our previous guest commentators and see if they don't mind recording one and sending it. That way, you guys, like I said, can just have a face to go with the voice, kind of understand where we're coming from, what you might expect in the future. But anyway, thank you for joining me. It's been fun. Hopefully, you enjoy our podcast. And again, if you have any ideas, just let us know. We'll see if we can't work it in. But yep, bye.